Anilji for the invitation and Rajeshwar for dragging us in this. Because I asked him, what do I have to do with tobacco? मैं तो ट्रॉमा का आदमी हूँ, उसे इंजरी प्रिवेंशन के लिए आप बात करते हैं, लेकिन there are similarities when we discuss the human behavior कि smoking or chewing tobacco. I'll start with few case scenarios actually. One of my seniors at Allahabad Medical College way back in 1978-79, he was in the habit of having pan and tobacco, and he was a surgeon. Another doctor turned politician from Bihar, he walked into my OPD. This was when Mr. Narasimha Rao was Prime Minister and he was Member of Parliament from Bihar. And I did a biopsy on his tongue. And I knew what it is. And he survived maybe 6 months after that diagnosis. And he was chewing tobacco and pan. Another person I knew very closely was a professor of community medicine. And he was director of National Institute of Health and Family Welfare. He was in the habit of chewing tobacco and pan. Again, all these gentlemen are no more in this world. That my colleague from Allahabad, he succumbed. Mr. Manoj Pandey, who was the Member of Parliament, he succumbed very quickly. Dr. Devkinandan, he succumbed. Another doctor from RML Hospital, and he was a senior doctor. And we used to tell him, why don't you have chewed enough, why don't you quit now? None of them would listen. So this is the human behavior we're talking. And I was introduced to this when I was very young, maybe 10-year-old, if I recollect, in mid-60s. Mother-in-law of my eldest sister in Agra, she lived near Manpuri. And Manpuri tobacco you must have heard of. I think a lot of work was done in Agra also at that time, at ICMR also, with Manpuri tobacco habit. And it was the betel nut in small grated way and tobacco put together in the mouth, and she developed oral cancer at that time, and naturally there was no treatment and she died of that. So I have seen enough of oral cancer. I think smoked tobacco, most of the people in the morning talked about that. In India, smoked tobacco is a problem, but chewing tobacco is much more a problem, societal problem in rural as well as urban India. Whether UP, whether Bihar, whether southern states, it's a huge problem. So what our cancer specialist and chief of cancer center, Dr. Rath, says 80-20. In India, it is 80-20. That 80% cancers are in head and neck, and 80% are tobacco related. And they are preventable, as somebody said. And this is what similarly I find in injury. When we say, we talk about COVID deaths, we talk about other problems in India, and here we have the tobacco-related incidents. If you look at in our country or globally also, that there was a study in UK which actually looked at the lifespan of medical professionals over 40 years, those who was indulging in tobacco smoking, naturally in the UK more so. And when we say in morbid obesity, 12 years of your life are taken away with the obesity. So if you are supposed to live for 80 years, you will live 12 years shorter. The tobacco also does the same. 7.5 to 10 years lifespan is shorter if you are smoking. But there are a lot of anecdotes. People say, he was smoking and he lived for 90 years. he was in 80 years, but they didn't, people don't know their lifestyle, what they compensated with, the trade-off, the physical activity, their diet, and etc. So almost 1.6 billion tobacco users globally, as it is, the figures are. And India is the dubious distinction for everything, so is for tobacco. That second largest producer, second largest consumer, and what Athar has been talking about, harm reduction. And that is where I think the challenge lies for all of us, that should we, and Dr. Khilani also spoke about that, but I think regulation can do, it is important, it can do good, like when I'm a surgeon, so when I used to go to my OT, Dr. Khilani, Dr. Ravi Batra used to smoke in the changing room. And I always used to fight with him, go out and smoke, don't smoke here. We had a lot of fight on that, smoking. So regulation, what it did, that once it was banned in public places and workplaces, we could authoritatively tell people not to smoke. Like if you're traveling in car, or you're traveling in bus, train, then you can tell people, please don't smoke here. It's not allowed. And people would listen then. Otherwise, before that, they'll fight and they will not listen to you. So that regulations also are important. It's not that they are not. And then basically, tobacco advertising is cut down quite a lot now. We see surrogate advertising might be there, but I don't see for this thing. I think some of the films and television serials, they still camouflage smoking by writing that. That should also be banned forthwith, because it does impact younger population, the who is smoking and where. So they find and they feel that it is somewhat useful if it is allowed in the serials or films. I think it has been done quite a lot, but I think more needs to be done in that area. And then naturally, what there is an article with, I think Anilji sent me, one of the articles he sent me, which was discussing about what Athar was asking, is it the nicotine or the smoking? What is more harmful? So naturally it is related to the duration, the amount, quantity what we consume, whether it's chewing or smoked tobacco. But yes, the human behavior, as Dr. Nimesh will, I think, talk about it more, banning may not be altogether possible, and banning always brings about, like in Bihar, every now and then you hear the spurious liquor killing people. So that happens. So we have to find alternatives. And India, large rural population indulge in BD. So there is employment. All those issues also come. From medical perspective, like people will ask those who we operate, and then they'll ask, Dr. Sab, can we take a drink after 1 week or so of operation? I said, look, as a doctor, I cannot ask you to take drink. But it is not going to harm. So if you have been taking, you may take, but don't ask me. Don't get endorsed by me. That doctor has told me, so I can take it. So I think that is where is the problem comes up. But I think is more so the low socioeconomic group is impacted by BDs, by chewing tobacco, by pan products, because it's a 1 rupee sachet of these all these products which come in these small sachets, and that is actually doing much more harm, and they develop this addiction to that, and it's a very paradoxical situation. Like IPL was going on, and we could see the advertisement for these games, and they'll very quickly say it may be addictive. Then why we allow? And you are indulging the young people, the children, to indulge in this betting games and all that. So I think it's a very difficult rope for even politicians. I would say policymakers, it's not easy. What should be banned, what should not be banned, because there is always hue and cry. But I think this article, Anilji, what you sent was a good article, where I think he wrote very lately in January 2022 that we should rethink nicotine and respect consumer. I think that's the title of that article. What he is saying, the same thing what I think Rajiv and both Madan discussed, that banning may not be the only wise thing. So we have to provide alternative even for those temporarily who wants to quit smoking or chewing, both. Basically in India we should be focusing more on chewing tobacco rather than smoke tobacco. I think that is where we fall into the trap of Western. West can do, they have done with legislation, they banned in flights, public places, and they have shown impact of this risk reduction, what we can call. So I think what I would end by saying that we have to, there are not enough studies on alternatives comparing the smokes, but largely the harms are due to smoked tobacco and chewing tobacco in India, where the people keep it for long hours. They sleep, keep that khani and sleep overnight. And if that is done for 10 years, 20 years, surely 100% it is, one is going to develop cancer. There is no, and naturally it affects, as Nimesh will talk about, mental health issues, but cardiovascular diseases are directly linked to smoking. Why I started disliking smoking, one of my very close friends in medical college, and that is where 14, 15, 16 years, when you start smoking as a, just what was discussed in college, Shaukiya Piliya ek cigarette, and at that time, naturally you can't afford a filter cigarette, so Charminar was the cigarette, and he started using it, and he developed addiction to it. Finally, he quit when he had stenting. So that can do trick to his, but that is late. So that is where I would say, and thank you once again for inviting me for this, to sharing some of my thoughts. But I think it's something I compare with helmet use for risk reduction in for head injury on the roads. Everybody knows that you put on a helmet, fasten it, it will save you the day, your life. But people don't do that. 100 lives are lost every day on our roads. Young lives are lost because they have not put on a helmet and fastened it. India, 72% of motorized automobiles on our roads are two-wheelers. They are not four wheels. So that is something we have to do with the tobacco or nicotine also. But it's a difficult task for the, because human behavior is very big. Adult human behavior, habit develops in the teens, but it goes on into the adulthood. That's the problem. So somebody who smokes at the age of 10, 12 is likely to be addicted much more than you. If you see, I think Dr. Nimesh would agree that hardly anybody at 30 years of age would start smoking and then will develop addiction. It is the teens who start smoking or start using tobacco or whatever, and then they develop this addiction. So that is where we have to see how we can develop that kind of a culture from the families and from the peer groups, that children don't indulge in that. And that is something is very, very important. And it is, smoking or tobacco is as much a problem in urban India as much in rural India. It's no less. Both it is covering. So thank you so much.